The sunlight struck the hotel lobby in harsh, golden beams, cutting through the dust that hovered like tiny suspended stars above the polished marble floor. The hum of early morning activity was soft but insistent. A bell jingling at the entrance, the scrape of shoes across tile, a muted chatter of staff setting tables and arranging chairs. Ethan Caldwell knelt near the far corner, wiping the base of a brass railing with a damp cloth. The rag smelled faintly of lemon and bleach, its fibers fraying along the edges. His hands moved in precise, practiced arcs, aligning each streak-free surface with exacting care. He paused for a moment, noticing the warmth of the sun on the backs of his knuckles, the slight vibration under the marble floor as a trolley passed, the faint metallic tang in the air from the cleaning solution. These small details mattered to him more than anyone would ever know. Each surface, each object, carried a responsibility he had silently claimed for himself. The lobby, with its soaring windows and ornate chandeliers, was a world in miniature, a world he observed, measured, and maintained. Ethan's gaze drifted toward the entrance, where sunlight pooled like liquid gold. In that moment, his mind wandered to Lila, her hair in morning tangles, the way she hummed as she read, the small freckle at the corner of her right eye that reminded him of his late wife. He had made peace with a quiet life, away from engineering offices, blueprints, and accolades. The hum of ambition had been replaced with the gentle cadence of necessity. Yet beneath the calm, a wound throbbed, a memory of a bridge collapse years ago that should never have happened, a betrayal that cost him more than he would ever confess, a promise broken to someone he had loved fiercely. The lobby doors opened with a soft chime. Margaret Whitmore stepped in, her heels clicking with the precision of a metronome. She wore a tailored cream suit, silk scarf knotted just so, and eyes that swept the room with both appraisal and dismissal. Her presence carried authority, wealth, and the subtle cruelty of someone used to being feared rather than loved. She paused, observing Ethan, who had risen and straightened the hem of his uniform shirt, smoothing invisible wrinkles over the front of his apron. "Ethan Caldwell," she called, her voice sharp, carrying across the marble and into the ears of early patrons. "Still polishing the brass like it will change the world for you." The words landed like ice cubes in his chest, cold and sharp. Laughter rippled from a nearby table where hotel regulars had gathered, not cruel but eager to witness spectacle. Ethan's jaw tightened. He said nothing. He did not flinch. He straightened the rag in his hand, wiped a streak from the railing, and stepped back. The world had always dismissed him. This was nothing new. Margaret circled him, tapping a manicured fingernail against the banister, her gaze calculating. "Do you ever consider that someone like you might, I don't know, be capable of actually providing for a family? Or is this dust and polish the sum of your ambition?" The remark was calculated, personal. She knew he was a single father. She had observed him during school drop-offs. The sting was not only professional but deeply human. He felt the heat rise in his ears, the subtle tremor of emotion he carefully repressed. And yet, he remained composed, aligning a set of silver teaspoons with deliberate precision. A patron coughed, a waiter froze mid-step, and Margaret's smile widened. She had won the moment. The humiliation was complete, public, visible, layered with social judgment. The lobby, normally alive with soft murmurs, fell into a thin, electric quiet. Ethan noticed the contrast between the laughter ringing in his ears and the pounding of his own restrained heartbeat. He straightened his shoulders and inhaled the faint, antiseptic scent of the polished floor, grounding himself. For a brief moment, he allowed himself a private thought: let her think she sees me. Let her believe she knows the measure of my worth. Ethan's uniform was worn at the elbows and frayed at the collar, but it fit him with quiet dignity. The soft cotton against his skin was the only armor he required. Margaret's heels clicked again as she pivoted, ready to move on to another target of amusement. The patron's eyes followed her, some smirking, some curious, all assuming that the man standing with calm resignation had been bested. He noticed a small detail, the chipped edge on a teacup at the nearby service cart. His hands, steady and methodical, replaced it without a word, as though the lobby's perfection mattered more than their laughter. A single droplet of cleaning solution ran down his wrist. He wiped it away with the rag, inhaling the faint lemon scent once more. No one noticed. He did not need them to. Margaret paused near the grand staircase, glancing back. "Make sure the carpets are spotless before noon, Ethan. I would hate for someone like you to disappoint in more than one way." The barb, again public, again cruel, drew a low murmur from the nearby table. He nodded faintly, acknowledging the instruction without emotion, the muscles of his face still controlled, the calm mask perfectly maintained. The lobby doors swung open again, bringing a crisp gust of early spring air. Ethan shivered slightly, the chill crawling up the marble beneath his shoes. He folded the rag carefully, placed it on the counter, and walked to the front desk to empty the trash bins. Patrons passed, oblivious. The bell above the door jingled. Margaret's laughter echoed behind him, faint now, but still sharp enough to linger. He paused near the entrance, catching the sunlight on the polished brass handle of the revolving door. What he had done 15 years ago to end up here, no one in that room could have imagined. The thought lingered, heavy and unresolved. It was a weight he carried silently, as he had always carried it. The lobby was immaculate, the floor gleaming in the light, yet beneath it, secrets festered, truths that, when revealed, could shift everything. A child's laugh echoed from the elevator bank, a small, bright sound that reminded him of Lila waiting at home, oblivious to the social theater she had narrowly avoided. Ethan's shoulders relaxed for the briefest of moments. He had survived countless challenges before, this was merely another. But beneath the calm, the question simmered, unspoken and unresolved. Who is this man, really? And what does he carry that no one can see? As he wheeled the trash bin toward the service corridor, the sun hit his face in a sudden shaft, highlighting the fine lines around his eyes, the slight calluses on his fingers. He breathed in the lobby's mix of lemon polish, fresh coffee, and early morning sunlight. He had been unseen for years, overlooked by the world, and yet every motion he made was deliberate, precise, and meaningful. Margaret's presence faded behind him, but the sting of her humiliation lingered, mingling with the quiet pride of a man who had learned that dignity is never granted. It is claimed in silence, one careful step at a time. Ethan straightened the bin in the corridor, adjusted the handle, and inhaled again. The lobby was emptying, the first hum of the day's patrons beginning to rise. The marble floor reflected the chandelier's early light, catching the dust motes in an almost reverent display. He allowed himself a private thought, a quiet, unspoken vow: whatever else happened, whatever humiliation, whatever loss, he would not falter. He would not be defined by the world's perception of him. And somewhere deep beneath the calm, the weight of what he had carried all these years pressed silently against him, waiting for the moment the world would finally see. Chapter 1 ends with the open question of Ethan's hidden past, and what he truly carries, planting the tension for the next chapter. The smell of damp tile and polished wood hung in the hotel corridor, heavy and warm, as Ethan pushed the service trolley toward the lobby bathrooms. Water had begun to seep from a cracked valve beneath the sinks, spreading thin rivers across the cream-colored tiles. The metallic tang of plumbing mixed with the faint scent of lemon polish he carried from the lobby. Patrons were milling about, oblivious to the danger, their footsteps splashing softly in the shallow flood. Ethan knelt beside the main pipe, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, the fabric of his uniform damp against his forearms. He traced the leak with a practiced eye, noting the minor misalignment at the joint, the small rust spots that hinted at a slow, underlying corrosion. His hands moved with deliberate calm, fingers probing fittings, adjusting wrenches, improvising clamps. Every motion precise. Every decision measured. From the marble staircase, Margaret's voice cut across the corridor like ice through fabric. "Ethan! What on earth are you doing? You have 5 minutes, or this entire lobby will be ruined." The threat was public. The lobby's patrons and staff had begun to gather, sensing the chaos. Ethan did not flinch. He kept his head low, working quickly yet methodically. The water hissed faintly against the temporary seal he fashioned from a folded rag and a clamp scavenged from a maintenance cart. It held for now. Margaret strode down, her heels clicking sharply against tile. She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, a faint curl of exasperation at her lips. I don't care if you think you can fix it. This is beyond your pay grade. Do you have any idea how humiliating it would be if... Ethan straightened briefly, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. I do, he said calmly. No anger, no apology. Just the quiet assertion of competence. The room went silent. Not the forced hush of polite attention, but a pause pregnant with disbelief. Margaret blinked. The guests blinked. Even the cleaning staff stopped mid-motion, unsure if they should intervene or step back. Water was no longer spreading, contained entirely within the makeshift barrier. The hiss subsided. The leak was under control. For a moment, only the sound of dripping water filled the air, each drop echoing in the cavernous corridor. Ethan wiped the floor with a mop, carefully directing puddles toward the drain. His movements were almost meditative, yet each was calculated, born of deep knowledge. Margaret's composure faltered. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her sharp features. How did you manage that? She asked, her voice a notch quieter, less commanding. Ethan did not answer. He returned the mop to the cart, adjusted the handle with meticulous care, and straightened his uniform collar. The silence spoke for him. The guest's eyes lingered, shifting from him to Margaret and back, confusion and awe warring across their faces. He had solved the problem no one expected him to handle, and he had done it without spectacle, without announcement. A hotel bell chimed faintly as another guest entered, but the energy of the corridor remained altered. Margaret's usual air of invulnerability had been cracked. She tried to speak again, a reprimand forming on her lips, but no words were strong enough to assert authority over the quiet power emanating from Ethan. He paused for a moment, noticing the way the early afternoon sunlight struck the wet tiles, glinting like shards of glass. The sensation under his shoes, slick but steady, grounded him. He inhaled deeply, the mixed sense of damp tile, polish, and faint coffee from the nearby cafe mingling in his lungs. There was a momentary satisfaction in observing the controlled chaos he had tamed, yet he allowed no pride to surface. This was not victory, it was precision. Margaret moved closer, attempting to reclaim dominance. Do you understand the ramifications if that pipe had burst? Her tone was sharp, layered with disbelief. Ethan met her gaze evenly. I understand, he said simply. His voice carried no trace of emotion beyond calm assurance. A guest ventured a hesitant question. You repaired it yourself? Ethan's lips curved in the faintest acknowledgement. He did not elaborate. The pause hung in the air, a quiet challenge. He had done what few thought possible, yet he revealed nothing about who he truly was. The open loop deepened. Who was this man, really? What had trained his hands and mind to move with such authority? Margaret's eyes flicked to the small detail Ethan had left for them all to see, the repaired valve, now held perfectly in place, the water contained, the floor drying under the mop's motion. It was more than a technical fix. It was a demonstration of control, of knowledge that went far beyond janitorial skill. The lobby's marble floor reflected the sunlight like liquid gold. Patrons whispered among themselves, unsure if they had witnessed luck or expertise. Ethan collected his tools silently, arranging them neatly back on the cart, each item in its place as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. He noticed the small detail of a chipped tile at the corner of the main entrance. His gloved fingers traced the imperfection for a moment, and he noted it mentally for repair later. Attention to detail, he knew, was always revealing. One small flaw ignored could unravel an entire structure, and he had learned that long ago, in a life no one in this lobby could imagine. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She had attempted to assert humiliation, to demonstrate superiority, to remind everyone that Ethan Caldwell was less than. But for the first time, doubt had crept into her carefully curated world. That doubt would fester. That doubt would matter. Ethan stepped back, letting the mop drip into the bucket, listening to the slow hiss of water draining into the pipe. The corridor was calm again. Patrons resumed their movement, though their glances lingered longer than polite courtesy required. Margaret turned sharply, walking away with her heels clicking, but not before she cast a glance back, one that would haunt her, subtle but unmistakable. A faint smile touched Ethan's lips as he surveyed the lobby, now fully under control, yet unchanged to the casual observer. He moved with the same measured steps, aligning silver teaspoons and dusting the brass railing near the entrance. Nothing extraordinary appeared to have happened. And yet, everything had shifted. He glanced toward the sunlit corner where he had begun the day, thinking briefly of Lila. She would never know the quiet triumph he carried within these walls. She would never see the satisfaction in restoring order, taming chaos without drama. But she would know he was capable. And that knowledge, unspoken and invisible, was enough. The open loop remained, heavier now than ever. Who was this man, really? What had he done to shape himself into someone who could move with calm authority in the midst of sudden chaos? What had he sacrificed, endured, and hidden beneath the fabric of his uniform? As he pushed the mop back toward the supply closet, the subtle warmth of the sun on his shoulders reminded him of the fragile balance of life, that dignity could be maintained even in invisibility, and power could be exercised without spectacle. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet anticipation stirred. Margaret had glimpsed a fraction of his competence, but she did not yet understand its depth. Rain streaked the hotel windows, hammering the glass with a relentless rhythm that echoed through the polished lobby. The sound mingled with the muted conversations of morning guests, and the soft scrape of mops across wet floors. Ethan Caldwell moved quietly, pushing a trolley laden with cleaning supplies, the wheels squeaking in measured arcs. His uniform clung damply to his back, and the faint smell of bleach and wet carpet hung around him like a second skin. Margaret Whitmore's presence was immediate. She had entered from the grand entrance, umbrella dripping on the marble, silk scarf damp and clinging to her neck. She swept past Ethan, eyes sharp, scanning the lobby as if it were a chessboard and he were a mere pawn. She stopped abruptly, turning toward him with her signature mixture of exasperation and condescension. "Ethan," she snapped, her tone cold, precise. "The carpets were not dried properly yesterday," guests complained. "I don't know how you managed to create chaos in something as simple as cleaning." Ethan straightened, inhaling the faint scent of rain mixing with polish. He did not reply. He understood the ritual. Margaret needed witnesses, needed to assert superiority publicly. His silence was the only weapon he possessed in moments like this. He tilted his head slightly, aligning a stack of napkins with meticulous care, letting the calm in his posture speak louder than any words. Margaret's lips curled. "And what about your daughter?" she said, loud enough for a nearby waiter to flinch. "Do you even consider the impression you make? One mistake, and she might lose her school place, you realize. Can you even provide for her properly, Ethan?" The words were a jagged intrusion. Lila. Her safety. His ability to protect her. The spike of fear and anger flared briefly, then retreated into controlled calm. He knew the stakes. Margaret had crossed into personal territory. His heart tightened, but he allowed only the slightest contraction of his jaw to betray him. That evening, Ethan sat alone in his small apartment, Lila asleep upstairs. The room smelled faintly of tea and paperbacks left open on the couch. He sat at the kitchen table, fingers tracing the grain of the wood, and allowed the past to seep back in. He had once been a civil engineer, designing bridges that spanned rivers, skyscrapers that pierced the sky. His work had been praised, lauded, and depended upon. But one misjudgment by a corrupt superior, a calculation ignored, a warning dismissed, had led to a collapse. A bridge failed. Lives were lost. His career ended. His wife left, taking only Lila's smile with her into their separate life. He pressed his palms to his eyes, feeling the faint grit of city dust still embedded in the skin from years ago. No one in this lobby would imagine the magnitude of the intellect, precision, and responsibility he carried beneath this simple uniform. No one would imagine the sacrifices made to survive quietly, invisibly, in service of a single child. The next morning, the conflict escalated. Margaret had mobilized her social power. Rumors of negligence spread among staff, anonymous complaints about Ethan's work reached the hotel board, and a letter from Lila's school arrived, not direct accusation, but a subtle query about her father's capacity and stability. The implications were unmistakable. Ethan's job, his reputation, and Lila's future were now at risk simultaneously. He walked through the lobby, the rain outside slicking the marble with small puddles. Each footstep echoed against the high ceilings. Patrons passed, oblivious to the silent tension threading the space. Ethan noticed the small details: a chipped edge on a chair, the misalignment of tablecloth corners, the faint scratch in the varnish of a service cart. Every imperfection spoke of the chaos Margaret had introduced indirectly, and every one presented an opportunity to restore order, to exercise intelligence. Margaret appeared at the reception desk, orchestrating whispers and side comments, subtly undermining Ethan's work. She smiled at the staff, a thin, calculated curve, watching for reactions. Ethan did not engage. He swept the floor methodically, each motion deliberate, his mind cataloging everything: her routines, her moods, her vulnerabilities. He had learned over years of silent observation that power always revealed its cracks when examined carefully. That night, the hotel accountant approached him quietly. She was middle-aged, eyes weary, hands calloused from long hours of paperwork. "Ethan," she said softly, "I've noticed discrepancies in Margaret's reports. Not minor errors, patterns. She's been falsifying maintenance logs and misallocating funds. But be careful. She's ruthless if she senses scrutiny." Ethan nodded, absorbing the information with careful calm. The room smelled faintly of old paper, ink, and the lingering aroma of brewed tea from the service cart nearby. A plan began to take shape, a slow, deliberate unraveling of Margaret's constructed dominance. Days passed. Margaret escalated further, issuing warnings, fabricating minor accidents, and whispering threats about Ethan's capacity as a father. Each humiliation landed with a weight that threatened to break the fragile balance he had maintained. Yet he endured. Each time, he responded with calm precision: a repaired pipe, a perfectly aligned service cart, a quietly resolved minor dispute among staff. Each act demonstrated competence, but none gave her the satisfaction of public retaliation. Then came the dark moment. Margaret intercepted a delivery addressed to Lila's school, a letter implying Ethan's incompetence. The school called, their tone polite but concerned. He felt the sting of betrayal from institutions he trusted, a familiar echo of the collapse years before. His reputation, his livelihood, and his daughter's security all teetered on the edge. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine failure, dismissal, social ostracism, loss of his daughter's place at school. The lobby, his workplace, the space he had carefully maintained, seemed suddenly alien and hostile. Yet beneath the fear, beneath the weight of humiliation and threat, Ethan's mind remained steady. He recalled the lessons of his past life: attention to detail, strategic patience, careful observation, and the power of silence. He had survived collapse before. He could endure it again. And he had a daughter counting on him. As the rain hammered the windows that night, the apartment felt colder than usual, the shadows of the room stretching long across the floorboards. Ethan sat, the faint warmth of a teacup between his palms, staring into its brown surface. He allowed himself one thought: the world had underestimated him for too long. Margaret had crossed a line, but he was ready. The next steps, carefully calculated, would turn her own arrogance into vulnerability. The lobby remained quiet in the early hours of morning, still damp with rain, still reflecting the sharp light of chandeliers overhead. The silence was both heavy and comforting. Ethan's reflection in the marble tiles looked ordinary, almost invisible, but within that calm exterior simmered intelligence and resilience honed over years of loss, betrayal, and sacrifice. The stage was set. Margaret had no idea what was coming. And yet the question lingered unresolved: could the man who had once survived a bridge collapse, personal loss, and institutional betrayal reclaim control in a world that had long written him off as invisible? Could he protect Lila while dismantling the carefully constructed power of a woman who had publicly humiliated him? The hotel lobby was hushed, damp sunlight spilling across the marble floors, reflecting puddles from a morning drizzle that lingered at the entrance. Ethan stood near the service corridor, his fingers wrapped around a folder of meticulously collected documents. The smell of wet tile, polish, and faint coffee filled the air, mingling with the sharp tang of early spring rain. Each step he took echoed against the high ceilings, deliberate and measured. Today, he would no longer wait in silence. Margaret Whitmore had arrived, radiating confidence in a cream-colored coat, umbrella dripping at her heels. She greeted the staff with a smile that was precise, practiced, and faintly cruel, fully expecting to reassert her dominance over Ethan once again. Her eyes flicked toward him, the usual glint of superiority sharp, but there was something different, a trace of uncertainty, as if the previous displays of competence had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Ethan's calm demeanor was deliberate. He had spent weeks gathering evidence, falsified maintenance reports, doctored inspection logs, and a series of financial misallocations that, if revealed, would shake the very foundation of Margaret's authority. He had enlisted the hotel accountant as a quiet ally, her testimony corroborating the irregularities. Together, they had constructed a precise narrative of truth, ready to be revealed. Margaret stepped closer, voice clipped and confident. "Ethan, I trust you've finished the lobby. Everything in order, I hope?" Her question was rhetorical, her tone condescending. She expected compliance, not resistance. Ethan straightened the folder, letting its weight anchor his presence. "Margaret," he said, calm, each word deliberate, "I believe there are matters that deserve everyone's attention." The guests in the lobby paused, sensing the tension. Margaret's smile faltered, but she maintained composure. "Matters? What could a janitor possibly know about the running of this hotel?" Ethan opened the folder, sliding documents across the counter. He pointed to a series of spreadsheets, photographs of faulty repairs, and notes meticulously compiled. "These matters concern your management, your decisions, and the consequences they have had, both on this building and the people who rely on it." A hush fell over the lobby. The regular patrons who had witnessed his earlier humiliations now leaned forward, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief. Margaret's eyes darted from paper to paper, realizing that her carefully constructed image was cracking under the weight of facts she could no longer control. "You're lying," she said sharply, though the tremor in her voice betrayed the doubt that had begun to creep in days earlier. Ethan remained calm, his voice unwavering. "I have corroboration from the hotel accountant," he said. The woman stepped forward, handing Margaret copies of emails and signed reports. Each detail was precise, incontrovertible. The silence in the room was profound, heavier than any shouted accusation, more powerful than any dramatic gesture. The lobby's marble floors reflected the sunlight, glinting off the evidence that Margaret had sought to hide. Guests shifted uncomfortably. The whispers began, muted, then growing louder. Margaret's mask of authority faltered. Her voice rose, attempting to reclaim command. "This is impossible! You've fabricated this!" Ethan shook his head ever so slightly. "I have done no such thing. These are records you yourself created, decisions you made, and consequences you attempted to conceal. I simply observed, recorded, and ensured that the truth would not be buried." Her hands trembled slightly, a micro-expression of panic betraying her usual confidence. Ethan's silence and measured words dismantled her theatrics more effectively than any confrontation could. Each piece of evidence revealed her negligence, her manipulation, and the depth of her attempt to control not only him but the narrative of the hotel itself. The accountant stepped beside Ethan. "I've watched you, Ethan," she said softly. Quietly. "You've always been diligent, precise, and far more capable than anyone has ever acknowledged. You've protected this hotel from disaster more than anyone realizes." The murmurs among the guests and staff grew, echoing through the high ceilings, filling the lobby with a low, electric tension. Margaret's eyes darted around, searching for allies, for witnesses who would support her, but everyone present now saw clearly. The power she wielded had been built on fear, manipulation, and deception. Ethan allowed himself a brief pause. His eyes softened slightly as he glanced toward the sunlight streaming through the lobby windows, remembering the first time he had been humiliated here. The memory was sharp, the laughter, the cutting words, the sting of social dismissal. But now the tables had turned. The moment was no longer about retaliation. It was about restoring balance, about letting truth be witnessed by those who had seen only surface impressions for too long. Margaret attempted one final gesture, a sharp step forward, a commanding tone, but it faltered. Her words carried no authority. The weight of the evidence, the quiet competence of Ethan's earlier actions, and the corroborating testimony of an ally left her exposed. The silence that fell after her failed attempt was profound, almost reverential, as if the lobby itself acknowledged that justice had arrived quietly, with precision. Ethan closed the folder, sliding it back onto the counter, his movements deliberate and calm. He did not gloat, did not revel in victory. He simply stood, the calm eye of a storm that had passed through the lobby and left order restored. Patrons and staff alike observed him with a mixture of awe and respect. Margaret's face was pale now, her confidence eroded to brittle fragments. He took a step back, allowing Margaret space to process the humiliation in front of the same witnesses who had seen her mock him weeks earlier. Her attempt to assert superiority was undone, replaced by the clarity of her misdeeds. She could no longer manipulate perception or fear, the truth was now public. A faint smile touched Ethan's lips as he glanced toward the service corridor, thinking of Lila. She would never need to doubt her father's strength, his integrity, or his ability to protect her. The quiet, steady vigilance he had maintained for years had finally borne fruit. The lobby settled into calm again, the sunlight catching the polished marble, glinting off small puddles left from the morning drizzle. Ethan aligned a teacup on the counter, as he had done countless times before, but now the weight of unseen competence rested fully in his posture. He had endured humiliation, threat, and the brink of despair. Yet here, in silence, he had demonstrated that intelligence, patience, and quiet observation could restore justice more effectively than anger ever could. And somewhere deep beneath the calm, the final truth of his resilience was clear. The man who had once survived loss, betrayal, and dismissal had not only endured, he had triumphed in the most precise and unassuming way imaginable. The first rays of morning sunlight spilled through the large hotel windows, cutting across the marble floor with a warmth that smelled faintly of rain and polish. Ethan Caldwell moved quietly along the lobby, aligning service carts and stacking fresh linens. His uniform, freshly pressed, clung neatly to his frame, a subtle contrast to the careful precision in his hands and the unassuming strength in his posture. The lobby felt different today, lighter, unburdened, a quiet calm that seemed to ripple through the polished surfaces. Margaret Whitmore had been formally reprimanded. The board had reviewed the evidence Ethan had compiled, falsified reports, misallocated funds, and a record of mismanagement that left no room for argument. Her social authority was stripped, and her reputation, once meticulously constructed, lay exposed to the very staff she had sought to dominate. The hotel's employees spoke in hushed admiration of Ethan's skill, discretion, and intelligence. He walked among them with a measured nod, acknowledging their respect without pride, letting the quiet dignity of competence speak louder than words ever could. Ethan's hands lingered over a small stack of silver teaspoons, aligning each with exacting care, before moving toward the grand staircase. His mind drifted briefly to Lila, her hair in tangled morning waves, the sparkle in her eyes as she opened the front door to greet him. The memory carried warmth, a reminder of why he had endured so many public humiliations, why he had allowed himself to remain invisible for so long. Every precise motion, every act of patience and observation, had been for her. Outside, the early morning air carried the crisp scent of spring, mingling with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the hotel cafe. Ethan inhaled deeply, feeling the subtle weight of his journey lift with each breath. The lobby, once a stage for humiliation and doubt, now reflected order, stability, and quiet triumph. He approached the reception desk where the hotel accountant waited, eyes bright with relief and subtle pride. "Ethan," she said softly, I don't think anyone here will ever underestimate you again." He nodded briefly, a faint smile brushing his lips. "It doesn't matter if they do," he said calmly. "What matters is that the work is done, the truth acknowledged, and those we care about are safe." His eyes flicked toward the sunlit corridor, thinking of Lila, imagining her small hands brushing his as she hugged him, oblivious to the battles waged in quiet halls and polished lobbies. Later, Ethan walked through the now empty corridor, feeling the faint chill of polished marble beneath his shoes, each echoing step a reminder of the path he had traveled. The humiliation, the threat to his daughter, the near collapse of his dignity, all of it had led here, to a moment where quiet precision and unwavering patience restored not only justice but equilibrium. He paused near the front entrance, sunlight glinting off the brass handles and reflecting on the faint ripples left by rain. His thoughts wandered to the past, the bridge collapse that had ended his previous career, the loss of his wife, the silent nights spent comforting Lila and holding himself together when no one else could see the weight he carried. He realized that everything, even the humiliation in the lobby, had shaped him into a man capable of calm authority, subtle strategy, and unwavering integrity. A bell chimed faintly above the revolving door. Lila appeared bright-eyed and untamed, her small coat damp from the spring drizzle. She ran toward him, dropping her school bag in the hallway and wrapping her arms around his waist. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, her voice a bubble of joy that seemed to warm the entire lobby. Ethan knelt slightly, inhaling her familiar scent, a mix of shampoo, rain, and innocence, and hugged her tightly. The world outside the hotel lobby and its polished marble floors, its whispered judgments, and its displays of power seemed to recede. In this moment, there was only Lila, only the quiet satisfaction of a father who had protected, endured, and quietly triumphed. They walked toward the elevator together, hands entwined, the polished floor beneath their shoes warm with reflected sunlight. Ethan allowed himself a final glance at the lobby, at the brass railings, the aligned service carts, the soft hum of morning activity. He had restored order, not for recognition, but because it was necessary, because dignity, patience, and competence had their own quiet power. As they exited the hotel into the cool spring morning, Lila chattered about school, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. Ethan listened, a gentle smile on his lips. The weight of the past, the humiliation, and the challenges he had faced no longer pressed heavily upon him. He had navigated them, silently, deliberately, and emerged intact, his daughter safe, his integrity intact, and his dignity restored. Ethan paused at the curb, watching Lila's small figure skip ahead on the wet sidewalk, sunlight reflecting in the puddles. He felt a quiet clarity, a philosophical certainty that had been shaped by years of hardship, observation, and quiet mastery. He inhaled the morning air deeply and thought, the world may never know the value of quiet competence, but those who matter, those who feel its presence, are the ones who see it truly. And in that moment, walking beside his daughter, Ethan understood that the measure of a man is not in the recognition he receives, but in the quiet strength he carries and the lives he protects without ever announcing it.